So many people out there are just like shadow boxers. They're just swinging at the sky, not realizing that the real target is spiritual. And if you don't start fighting in the spiritual realm, I can make this promise to you, it's lights out. I have read from the book of Colossians to you. Matter of fact, it would not hurt for me to open up my Bible and to read it for you yet again. It is definitely noteworthy. In chapter 1, and I'll read right at verse 15, he says this about Christ. He says, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Notice this, for by him all things were created that are in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is what? Before all things, and in him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. Notice this, that in all things he may have preeminence. Okay, so this is a very important principle for us to establish right off the bat as we have the discussion that we're about to have. And that centers around the fact that this battle that we are fighting is spiritual. We are not dealing with a set of circumstances that involve a series of, for a lack of better terms, kind of I don't know what you want to call it, a set of pawns that are visible in your eye that kind of get moved like a chess game on a chessboard. What we're actually dealing with here is we are dealing with a significant battle that is being fought. It is not only sophisticated, but it is stealthy. And not only is it stealthy, but for those people that even have a remote acclamation to the spiritual realm, many people still have a hard time being able to see the things that the Bible is talking about. This passage in Colossians actually tells us that for everything that's going on in the physical realm, there's something that's happening in the spiritual. So we have to keep that in mind. Now, keeping that in mind, we should also go to the book of Ephesians, where Paul makes a very interesting declaration, right? He tells people this. Look, these verses are oftentimes forgotten. He says this in verse 10. This is after he's talked about Christ and the church. This is after he's talked about walking in love. This is after he's talked about making sure your speech is manicured in a way that glorifies God and does not render life to the flesh. He says, therefore, keeping all of these things in mind, these are the things I want you to be aware of. Children, obey your parents. Parents, listen. Be good to your children. Fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. Don't make them angry because you lose your temper. Don't let them lose theirs, right? He gives all these exhortations in Ephesians, and then he says this, finally, this is the cherry on top. He sort of wants to wrap everything up here. He says, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Now, look, I don't know about you, but I'm going to just tell you this right now. I want to be strong in my own strength. That's where I find myself oftentimes. I am the type of person that does not become fatalistic when something goes wrong. I'm the type of person that wants to put up my dukes and fight a lot harder. Put up my dukes, that's an old school term, right? I want to fight a lot harder so that I can work through the issue. And oftentimes I find myself walking into the trap of literally making the assumption that in my own strength, I can actually fix the problem, when in reality, there is no strength available to me at all, period, under my own direction or help or effort that will defeat the problems that we face in the spiritual realm. So no matter how hard I try to get myself to the place where I am stronger, better, ready to go, those efforts are going to fail. Now, I'm going somewhere with all of this, folks, because some of you might be listening to this and thinking, what does this have to do with Israel? Believe me. Allow me to get personal for just a second. Allow me to talk about myself in context of a struggle that I continue to have, which I assume is about the same kind of struggle that you have. And that is, we fight this battle, oftentimes feeling like we're unequipped, and in many cases feeling like we're about to lose. I am constantly having to remind myself that God is the one doing the fighting. So when the hellacious variables come up that oftentimes distract me because it feels like it's overwhelming, because it actually is, God is the one that's in control, and God is the one that's going to be able to create for me whatever it is that I need in order to accomplish whatever purpose he's called me to, because God doesn't call people to a purpose without already equipping them for the work that he's called them to. Kind of cool stuff, right? Some of you might be going, well, James, okay, fine, but I'm just trying to survive here. Okay, I'm not even talking about ministry. Well, did you know that your whole life is a ministry? Did you know that everything about you is a ministry? Did you know that the very moment you wake up in the morning, the precious breath that God gives you, the fact that your eyes are open and that you're alive and you've achieved consciousness is evidence of the fact that God has a purpose for you, that God has called you to something. But we don't oftentimes see that because we are contending in this battle that is spiritual, but we don't look at it through spiritual eyes. We oftentimes forget about the spiritual side of it. So I want to lay this foundation down because we're going to go to Genesis in just a minute. And hopefully this will help all of us to kind of connect the dots. I oftentimes like doing this because it helps remind me of that which is. I mean, it's easy to lose sight in my mind and in my heart about those things because in just a hot flash, you can just completely forget it all because that's the nature of the beast. That's how I am. That's how many of you are. If you're anything like me, you're going to be that way, right? So he says, look, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. So don't find strength in yourself. You go look into yourself to find strength. You're going to find weakness because you're going to fail, right? There's no way you're ever going to find strength within yourself, in and of yourself on your own. It never works that way. God makes that clear. Now, the world wants to give us the message that says, oh, look within. And as you look within, you'll find everything that you need to be able to be strengthened. No, you look within, you're going to get depressed. You look within, you're going to get more jacked up than you already are, right? You look within, all you're going to see is a really ugly picture of something that is completely broken apart, because I know that when I look within, I see nothing but yuck. I see nothing but ugly. I don't see good things. That is because I recognize the condition of total depravity in which I was born. And I know, as the Apostle Paul told us, that within me, I can do nothing good. None of us on our own can do anything good. We look into ourselves and all we do is we find nothing but destruction, right? We look into ourselves and all we do is we find nothing but hopelessness. We look into ourselves and all we do is we find nothing but just pain and suffering and hardship, because to have to force us to look into ourselves continues to propagate the confusion that mechanism creates. The reality of it is God says, look, I want you to look at me. I want you to seek me, because if you cannot see what is happening in the spiritual realm, wouldn't it make sense for you to lean on the person who can see? God sees it. He sees it clearly. We don't have to see it. We don't need to sit down and be these experts in kind of knowing what kind of entity is flying through the sky at the current moment. We don't need to be able to recognize all the pows and the bangs and the explosions that are going on in heaven right now. Only thing we need to do is be close to the one who is preeminent over all of it, which is Christ. So the same guy who writes about the preeminence of Christ in the invisible realm, the same guy who says that for everything that's going on in the visible, there's something happening in the invisible, he tells us to be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. But then look what he says. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Do you know the most important part of this verse? The most important part of this passage does not have to do with the specific armaments that the Apostle Paul is going to talk about. Did you know that the most powerful and specific portion of this immediate context centers around the first verse that I read you, which was verse 10, And the second verse that I'm about to read you, or the third verse that I'm about to read you, which is verse 12. Verse 12 says, why? Why am I telling you to put on the whole armor of God? Why am I telling you to be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might? Why? Because of this. Because we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Pretty heavy. So the Apostle Paul here is telling us that the battle that we are facing is one that cannot be seen. We are incapable of being able to see it, yet it bears the greatest significance in the life that we live from day to day. By the way, this spiritual battle applies to whole nations as well, which we're going to get into in just a second, because we're going to talk about that aspect. We're going to talk about Israel. So now we know a few things. Now we know that for everything that goes on in the visible, there is something that's happening that parallels or commences in the invisible. We also know that we are called to rely upon the Lord, that the Bible actually makes it clear that what we're supposed to do is be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. We know that we are not wrestling against flesh and blood. We know that the wrestling match that we are having is against principalities and powers and so on and so forth. So we know all of those things, and all of that has been made very, very clear to us. If that is the case, and we know that that's the truth, how much more do you think we should be listening to the Bible when the Bible gives us very specific direction, especially when that direction doesn't even seem to make sense or seem to be beneficial to us in the current moment? By the way, do you guys understand that in the current day in which we live, it's not popular to be supportive of Israel? Did you guys know that? Did you know that if you express support for Israel, people just lose their minds? If you had to ask me what was the number one thing that got people completely riled up, where they just all completely lost their minds and went crazy, my answer to you would be the discussion of Israel. Why? Because it's spiritual. Why is it that people lose their minds when we talk about a country having the right to be able to defend herself? Why is it that people lose their minds when we talk about the fact that the farce that continues to be communicated about the Palestinian saga is not a correct assertion or representation of the truth? Why do people get mad when I make a statement like, this judicial reform is actually not a bad thing, it's actually a good thing, because activist judges in Israel are doing everything that they can to undercut the power of the Knesset right now? That's no joke. People get angry. Why? Because it's spiritual. Understand this, folks. Genesis here, we get a very interesting piece of insight. In Genesis chapter 12, God is making a promise to Abraham, right? He's the founding father of the nation. God makes a promise. This is what he tells Abraham at the beginning of chapter 12. And it says this right at the very beginning, verse 1. Now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. Did Abraham know what the land was at the moment? No, he did not know. But God said, I will show you the land. Abraham trusted that God would let him know. He said this in verse 2, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. But here's the area that we got to focus on right here. Verse 3. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. God has spoken, folks. His word has made it clear to us. These are not games that we play. We don't just say the things that we say just because they sound pretty. I don't preach the things that I preach just to show everybody that I know the Bible or I understand certain principles that maybe others might not. I say these things because they're true. And folks, let me just explain something to you. The condition of depravity that we see growing within the context of our great nation centers fully around one issue. Besides that of our nation completely rejecting God and having no regard for spiritual truth, it centers around how we treated Israel.